The trade deadline is less than 24 hours away. The Cubs have already been busy, but we expect a few more calls to be made within the next day or so. Jameson Taillon, he's scheduled to pitch tonight. Could today be his last game in a Cubs uniform? We're going to talk about that and more on this edition of the Cubs Baseball Channel, a trade deadline special. Make sure to like and subscribe. Get in that comment section. Let us know your thoughts on the Christopher Morel trade and your thoughts on what could be coming next. But here is your invitation to our show. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Cubs Baseball Channel. My name is Anthony Pasquale with the voice of the Tennessee Smokies, Mick Gillespie, and he's on Twitter at Broadcaster Mick. You can find me at @_Pasquale3. Guys, thanks so much for coming to chat some Cubs baseball with us with the trade deadline approaching. The Cubs obviously make that huge move yesterday that kind of shocked the baseball world. Christopher Morel, Hunter Biggie, and Ty Johnson on the way out to Tampa Bay, and the Cubs acquire Isaac Paredes, a guy who was in their system a long time ago, kind of worked his way up to become an all-star at the big league level and is an instant upgrade at third base. Mick, I know you talked about it yesterday, but what are your initial thoughts on this trade with the Rays?
Well, there's a couple things. First, it tells me that the Cubs aren't necessarily selling. I mean, they are buying. They get back a guy that they traded years ago. And I remember hearing someone prominent in the organization tell me that, hey, this guy can play. And they didn't think it was a good trade at the time to get rid of him, you know, because I was like, well, you got rid of Jeimer Candelaria. And they're like, hey, the other guy's better. And he has turned out to be better. He's an all-star. So he's a good all-around player. He's going to make up for a lot of the efficiencies in the game that Christopher Morel showed, defense, base running, you know, the sometimes lack of focus. Both guys hit for power, you know, and we'll see. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of Paredes, although we know he's an all-star. And so it's a piece that definitely helps the Cubs for a while too, because he's locked in. Now, for a team that has so much trouble finding bullpen help, you trade your best reliever and Hunter Biggie that you've developed. I mean, but he's a reliever. And on one hand, you're looking at a guy that has the potential to be a back-end closer. I mean, we saw him do that in the minor leagues. He was amazing last year in Double-A, struggled a little in Triple-A, injured the beginning of this year, or I think would have had a real shot to break camp with the Cubs. And then when he came back, he was great. And I didn't understand the shuttle service. If you're trying to win, keep your best out there. It doesn't always feel like that's the case with big league teams, not just the Cubs. It's like, hey, I got this guy and I'm going to put him. I can pick him up off of waivers and then I can get rid of him and save a spot. This guy was one of the best Cubs relievers, and that's why the Rays wanted him. And then Tyler Johnson's a guy who throws strikes, gets the strikeouts, a young arm. They see him projected as a big league starter. So the Cubs gave up some guys to get some guys, but I think just for the overall health of the team, you just addressed one of the biggest drags that this club's had since Chris Bryant, and that's third base. And so I feel like it's a pretty good trade.
Yeah, it at least answers. You come into the season, you're looking for an answer at first base and third base, and you're going to open to 2025 season with those positions answered. Michael Busch is your first baseman. Isaac Paredes is your third baseman, and that they're improvements from what you had prior and at least is an answer. The thing with Paredes too is, to me, he seems to be everything that people get mad at Christopher Morel for. He's not a big swinger. He's not going to chase pitches out of the zone. He's going to situationally hit. He's got a 283 average with runners in scoring position, and he plays good defense at third. And those were like the four knocks that Morel consistently got. Listen, I love the guy. He brought energy every day. He was fun to watch. No doubt a fan favorite. But there were facets of his game that the Cubs needed in 2024, and they haven't been getting from him. And he hadn't shown enough flashes for them to say he's going to give us those. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rays harness that and figure something out with Morel. But Paredes is kind of a lower risk, easier answer, and the Cubs have him for just as long. So I think in that way, it's a good move. You mentioned Chris Bryant. I want to ask you this. Number 17, number 44, and number 34 are the only three numbers that have not been touched from the 2016 team. Well, 17, not anymore. Isaac Paredes wore number 17 with the Tampa Bay Rays. Not only is he going to fill Chris Bryant's shoes at third base, but he's also going to fit that number in the locker room. He's going to be wearing number 17 for the Cubs. As a guy who really appreciated everything that Chris Bryant did for this team, along with Rizzo and Lester, who are those other guys who don those jerseys, does Paredes, or I guess anybody wearing number 17, bother you at all?
No, and I love Chris Bryant, but that's just the way it is. Until your number's retired and they put it on a flagpole, it's open for guys to wear, and it doesn't mean that it diminishes Chris Bryant, but this guy's pretty good too. He's an all-star. He brings a lot to the table. And when Chris Bryant signed with the Colorado Rockies, or when he got traded by the Cubs to San Francisco, that number got opened. And it's not like Chris Bryant spent 30 years as a Cub, 25 years as a Cub, 20 years as a Cub. He was there, did a great job while he was a member of the Cubs. But no, I'm not worried about that. And, you were talking about Morel, and we talk about the deficiencies in his game, and I agree with that. And, and I think that's, at the end of the day, it's going to be really difficult for the Rays to try to harness the ability of Christopher Morel, because it's just, he makes so many mistakes. It's like he's got the home run ability. He can come up with big hits, but the base running, the fielding, and all this other stuff, like at some point you either got to figure it out or you're going to be a DH. And maybe that's what they do with him. Maybe he's just a all-time DH and there'd be a role there, but he's a great person. And I do wish him the best, man. I mean, you're never going to find a better guy than Christopher Morel. And it was sad to see him go in that aspect.
Yeah, his teammates love him. The fans love him. So in that way, it definitely hurts. But you're getting a guy who's an all-star this season. And it should not only make your team better right now, but also make your team better next year and in years to come. I also think one of the best parts about it is it opens up a little bit more lineup flexibility, where you're able to put Suzuki in the DH spot. You're able to start those outfielders that you want to get in. And it also opens up a leeway for you to maybe see what you have with Owen Casey toward the end of this season or at the beginning of next season, because you're not hamstrung to Morel in the DH spot.
Yeah. And well, Owen Casey needs to be in right field. He's just a better defensive right fielder than, say, a Suzuki, way better.
Mm-hmm.
But Suzuki can hit. It's just the defense is, it just doesn't hold up. Maybe you could put him out there some, but I think, and I've said this for 2 years now, Owen Casey's the future of right field. Doesn't mean that there's not a spot for, say, a Suzuki. It just means that Owen Casey's the future of right field.
Yeah. Suzuki can be your DH. And I assume once the Cubs, get Bellinger back and Paredes comes to Cincinnati, I'd imagine we're going to see a lot of Suzuki in the designated hitter spot. But that's assuming that this team is going to stay constructed the way it is for the next day and a half. That's not necessarily the case. The Cubs have a lot of players that are potential to be dealt at the deadline. We're going to talk about Cody Bellinger. We're going to talk about Jameson, Taillon. We're going to talk about Nico Hoerner too, but I want to talk about this group of players, kind of not maybe going to generate that blue chip prospect back, but definitely have some value to sell. Hector Neris, the veteran reliever who is coming into his own as of late. Mark Leiter Jr., who is on fire at the moment. Drew Smyly, who's putting together quietly a really strong season for the Cubs with a sub-3 ERA. Mike Tauchman, who provides value as a fourth outfielder and will to just about any team. And Patrick Wisdom, who's swinging the bat a little bit better as of late, 2 homers in the series against Kansas City. Can the Cubs harness any value for these players and ship them to contenders?
And that's what I'm kind of trying to figure out right now. I mean, what direction we're going. I mean, I thought that this was going to be a sell year. And so far, what we've done is we've bought, right? And it's a team that has a 7% chance to make the playoffs. Now, with that said, I like what I'm seeing. And I guess what I really wanted to see Jed Hoyer do is to show me a direction, a path to a team that can win a World Series, right? And so giving up a couple of, mediocre prospects to get a guy that throws 98 and has a really good slider that hasn't figured it out, a former first-round pick, I think that's a viable deal. You gave up 2 really good prospect arms and a third baseman that I don't think was going to make it for an all-star. It gives you hope. And the fact that the guy's going to be there for 3 years, you like that as well. Now, this is the other part of it. Is this hey, you know what? We know that we're not making the playoffs this year, so we're going to move these guys, and we're going to try to get back some more players. Like I said, they've got to be AA or higher to be able to match what the team has right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is going to be interesting. I think Mark Leiter Jr. is the most valuable guy on this list. And I feel like if the Cubs trade him at the deadline, there's really, I think that there's a not much of a ceiling on what they can get back. He's a reliever. He's a late inning guy. You can use him as a setup man on a team that has a chance to win a World Series. These are the kind of guys that win the World Series for you. These are the kind of guys that go into these games and you got to get outs and they get them for you. I'm a big believer in Mark Leiter Jr. Hector Neris, if you could move him, fine with that. He signed a 1-year contract, get something back for him. Drew Smyly is another guy you probably wouldn't have signed if you didn't have to. He had the option. He came back. Hey, that's fine. But left-hander doing pretty good this year. Mike Tauchman, heard his name with the Yankees. They got Chisholm instead. Patrick Wisdom, I'd trade him in a second. I love the grand slam the other day. But if I could trade him, because all you got there is a DH that can hit for power and or a pinch hitter. But there's a team that might need that. So I don't know that there's a lot of value for Wisdom. I don't know that there's a lot of value for Tauchman. There's going to be value for Drew Smyly because he's left-handed. Hector Neris because he's got experience as a closer. And then I think that Leiter by far is the best of this group. And I think that they're all on the table because if I'm the Cubs and I'm saying, okay, we're not going to give up on this season. I don't feel like that. But at the same time, we know we're not probably going to make the playoffs because it's a 90-some% chance we're not. Let's go out and make these moves right here if we get the right return. And I feel like Jed Hoyer's kind of just sitting back and waiting. And I think that the Cubs could do something big. But then, I'll let you ask the next question because I think that you might be going this direction. I'm not 100% sure anymore that that's what they're going to do.
Yeah, you talk about Jed Hoyer having his sights set on 2025. Well, if that's the case, a lot of these players have control for 2025 and beyond. So why are you in any hurry to move Mark Leiter Jr. or to move some guys that we'll get into in a second, Nico Hoerner, Jameson, Taillon? But on this list, I saw a rumor on Twitter, don't know how factual it is, but the Atlanta Braves are interested in Drew Smyly. Maybe that's a team to explore with reliever-wise. I saw that the Yankees were interested in both Mike Tauchman and Mark Leiter Jr., so maybe you get a package together there. It looks like Jazz is going to play the infield for them. He's starting at third tonight for the Yankees, so that's going to be interesting. He's been moved from second base to the outfield in Miami, but now that he comes to New York and they're desperately looking for a third baseman, they wanted Paredes. We got him, so they're going to try Jazz Chisholm at third base, which means they might still be looking for an outfielder. So that puts Mike Tauchman and potentially Cody Bellinger still on their radar. And then Hector Neris, I wouldn't be surprised if he reunites with the Astros as they're looking for some bullpen help as they try to make another push for the division. But yeah, let's take it there. We talked about some of these guys who are fringe players. If you lose any of these 5 on the board, you're not going to be broken for next season. But a guy like Jameson, Taillon, a guy like Nico Hoerner, Cody Bellinger, those guys have some long-term value that you could be losing should you trade them. So let's start with Taillon. He's supposed to pitch today against the Reds. He's 7-5 on the season with a 2.96 ERA. But there's a bunch of teams that might be interested in him. The reports that we've seen are the Astros, the Yankees, and the Orioles are the most interested in Taillon. Jack Flaherty was scratched from his start tonight for the Tigers. He won't pitch. We're assuming he's going to get dealt sometime soon. I keep refreshing my phone to make sure we don't miss anything. But Taillon still scheduled to pitch tonight. Could this be his last start in a Cubs uniform, or is he a guy you're penciling in on Game 3 of the 2025 season as your 3 starter behind Steele and Imanaga?
I'd be shocked if they didn't trade him. I mean, but I've been shocked so far by these moves. I thought the first move for Pearson was, hey, we're setting up to trade some of the relievers, right? Taillon's going to give you the most value in the market because he's a starting pitcher, and he's got, and he's also got some years on that contract. and teams want him. I mean, you can't win a World Series without starting pitching. So, I mean, I would be surprised if he honestly, if he doesn't get traded, I'll be shocked.
Okay. I'm kind of thinking that they're not going to, just because I feel like if you were going to move him, you'd scratch him today. Nobody wants him to get hurt. Nobody wants him to.
Well, they may just be
I
playing.
guess true. We still have some hours before the game starts.
Yeah.
And he's a guy, he's pitching extremely well this year. He should have way more wins than he does. His ERA has been phenomenal since he came back from the injury. And it seems like over the last calendar year, pretty much since the All-Star break last year, he's really figured something out. He's not super old. He definitely has a lot of value, and he's got 2.5 years left on a deal. Teams should be lining up to acquire a guy like that, especially if you can pin the Yankees and the Orioles against each other and really get a good drawback. I would not be surprised to see Taillon go. It just doesn't seem like the Cubs are itching to move him. So if that's the case, then they're waiting to get blown away. You'd take something if they're going to get blown away, right?
Well, look, Hoyer's done a great job of negotiating. I mean, you can't, and I know there's a lot of people that are going to be like, hey, I read the comments, we need to fire him. We need to get rid of him, blah, blah. I'm not arguing for him or against him, but you got to give him his due. When it's come to these negotiations and kind of waiting things out, he's done a great job of it. The Cody Bellinger contract, Imanaga contract. Nobody thought that Imanaga was coming to the Cubs. Everybody was saying he was going to the Giants or the Red Sox. You remember? And then all of a sudden the Cubs get him. Hoyer did a fantastic job. That was a great contract. And I think that he's doing the same thing here. I think he's playing it, kind of quiet, laying in the weeds, and then he's going to spring when the opportunity comes. If the Cubs buy with a 7% chance to win, to make the playoffs, it's really shocking to me. I think there's a lot of pressure on this front office right now, because if I'm ownership, and I've said this before, I'm getting frustrated with the lack of winning, right? And the Dansby Swanson contract, I'm probably not really happy about that either, because of his lack of productivity. He looks like he's regressed this year at the plate. And you wonder, when guys get these big contracts, how satisfied are they? We don't know what he does behind the scenes, or is he putting too much pressure on himself? I mean, it goes the different ways. The bottom line is he's not getting it done, so maybe for this front office, the only way that they stick around is if they have a comeback and somehow make the playoffs. And that could happen, because you're not talking about a mile to get one of those playoff spots, but they would have to catch fire. And if they don't make trades like this, then it tells me they think they have a chance to make the playoffs. So the time would be around next year. But I don't know. What are you going to get next year? You're going to get last year's Taillon or this year's Taillon?
Exactly. And you have him for another year after that as well. But he's finally pitching like the guy that you paid for. And I know it seemed like they're buying right now, but they're not buying in a way that jeopardizes their future at all. Like usually when you see a guy buy, you look at the 2016 Cubs, you trade Gleyber Torres to go get Chapman. Like
these aren't rental guys. What you're saying. Yeah.
And we're not acquiring rental guys. We're acquiring guys that are not only going to help down the stretch, but also for the next year and the year after that. And we also haven't given up any prospect in our top 20 to acquire any of these guys. So that's why I feel like Hoyer's been really smart so far this deadline. It'll be interesting to see how the next couple of days go. We just talked about Taillon. What about Nico Hoerner? He's a guy. This is the way I'm going to frame it to you, because I think one of two things has to happen. Do the Cubs trade Nico Hoerner to open up second base for the combination of Matt Shaw and James Triantos to one of these teams, the Mariners, the Orioles, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers? Or do they hang on to Nico Hoerner and use Matt Shaw or James Triantos as a trade chip to acquire somebody bigger, maybe a Vladimir Guerrero Jr., somebody of that caliber? Because it seems like either way, it's like a half buy, half sell type of move. But like 2025 opening day, are you more confident that Nico Hoerner starting at second, or either Shaw or Triantos?
I would probably roll the dice and trade Nico if I got the right package. Nico's a great defender, good guy in the clubhouse. I like him, but doesn't hit for a lot of power. Doesn't drive in a lot of runs. And you got Matt Shaw, who's really starting to turn the corner on the power numbers, which is why they drafted him in the first round. And then, and you know, he's not as good as Triantos or Nico defensively, but he's not bad. And actually been playing a lot of shortstop, and the way that Dansby's hitting, even though Dansby's got that monster contract that goes on forever, you know, maybe he's a guy that plays some shortstop that can actually hit the ball. And then Triantos is, you know, kind of a hit machine. I mean, he's a better hitter than Nico. He's going to be a better hitter in the big leagues than Nico because he makes more contact than Nico. He's got more pop than Nico, and he's a better defender than Shaw. And I think he potentially too could be. I don't know that he'd be a Gold Glover like Nico. I mean, that's pretty high standard, but I don't think he'd be too far behind. I don't know if you put him out there and you're worried about his defense. He's a really good young player. And then you drafted 2 more middle infielders with your first 2 or your first 3 picks in the draft this year. Nico's very expendable.
Yeah, it seems that way. And especially because you have so many guys in the minors that are coming up, even behind Shaw and Triantos, that play some second or play some short.
Yeah.
You've gotten me excited about both of those guys. The way you talk about both Shaw and Triantos, and you've seen them a lot closer than I have. So I would not be too upset if the Cubs trade Nico, but he's got a lot of value and he's under control. So you have to make sure you get something worthwhile in return, because if not, he brings value to your team next year and the year after that. So it'll definitely be something to keep our eyes on. Now, here's probably the most polarizing option of them all. Cody Bellinger, as he continues to heal. The Phillies are rumored to have interest, so are the Yankees. And not really rumored, but the Braves and Mariners are looking for outfield help. So I threw them on the list too. Here's the thing about Bellinger, right? His contract is so weird because you could go and acquire him and he could end up joining you for next year, but he can also leave you high and dry. So you kind of have to like give up enough to acquire him for 2 years, but not give up enough where that if he only stays the rest of this year, you're going to feel like you got burned. So it's an interesting spot for these teams that are trying to look for him. And he's currently not healthy with a day to go before the trade deadline. But he obviously is one of the better players on the Cubs. And if he plays like last year, is one of the better players in the league. So he has some trade value. What do you think happens with Cody Bellinger?
But it's also the same thing that the Cubs have. I mean, like the opt-out that he has in his contract. I mean, you could go trade him or you could keep him, and you got to decide whether you think he's going to stay or not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the way that you value him if you're the Cubs is the same way that these other teams value him if you trade for him. You know, he's got Scott Boras as an agent. Boras had a miserable offseason. He's had a lot of great years, you know, with teams and getting huge contracts. Last year wasn't one of them. You know, would this be something that, you know, he says, hey, you know, you're out. We think we can get that long-term deal or not, you know. It's a tough deal for anyone. I think if I was the Cubs, I'd definitely trade him, but I wouldn't give him away. And but it's a risk. You know, you may get a deal for this guy, not take it, and he opts out. You don't make the playoffs, and you got nothing. You know, except you paid $30 million for a guy that's been hurt a bunch of times this year. You know, so you know it's been bad luck. But with that said, if you didn't trade him, I think the only chance you have to make like some kind of huge second half push to make the postseason, which really isn't totally impossible, but would definitely be climbing a tall mountain, would be with Cody Bellinger in there.
Exactly. Now, before we let you go and get on with the rest of the day, we're going to do some rapid fire here. I'm going to name a player. You're going to tell me if you think he gets traded. So you'll say yes or no. And then I'm going to say where, and you tell me which team.
Okay.
And then obviously if you say no, I'll just move on to the next guy. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
Hector Neris.
Astros.
Mark Leiter Jr.
Yankees.
Drew Smyly.
Not traded.
Mike Tauchman.
Not traded.
Patrick Wisdom.
Not traded.
Nico Hoerner.
Yankees.
Cody Bellinger.
Not traded.
Jameson Taillon.
Astros.
And Justin Steele.
No, not traded.
All right. So there are your predictions. I'm going to run through mine really quick. I agree. Neris to the Astros. I think Leiter to the Yankees makes sense. I don't think Smyly gets traded. I think Tauchman could go to the Braves or the Phillies. I think Wisdom, it's going to be really hard to trade him. I'm going to say Nico Hoerner to maybe the Red Sox.
Ooh.
I'll do Cody Bellinger not traded, Jameson Taillon to the Orioles, and Justin Steele not traded. So we agreed on some, but it'll be an interesting next 24 hours or so. And all you can hope is that the Cubs continue to look better for next year and beyond, because I really think if Jed Hoyer plays his card right over the next 24 hours, you could be looking at a playoff team in 2025. And that's what I have to hope for.
Yeah. And I want a World Series team, so whatever they're going to do today and tomorrow to get there, I'm fine with. But so far it's so interesting. I mean, like we did the video on Paredes and they go out and get him, It was like, wow, I mean, like, it's crazy. So anything can happen. I mean, I feel like we need to just get this video out there, because by the time we drop it, something else could be going on. And then all of a sudden we're gonna have to be on here again.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure you guys will see a lot of both Mick and I over the next 24 hours. So we'll spare you right now and we'll let you guys go. But make sure you guys stay with us on the YouTube channel. We're going to be dropping stuff as soon as we hear news. Same with Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Follow us on there. Get in all of our comment sections. Let us know your thoughts and your predictions. If you guys are right, we'll throw the comments up here and we'll talk about it as well. But thank you guys so much for joining us. A little trade deadline special. We'll talk to you guys soon. Cubs and Reds tonight. I will be on tomorrow morning recapping that game as well. Paredes won't join the team tonight. He may as early as tomorrow. So we'll keep an eye on that. But for now, go Cubs.